I'm going to kick things off with a couple of questions just to seed the conversation. So please do start to pull your questions together for the panel, and then we'll dive in. I think it's one thing that we have heard, and I'm sure you guys have heard this in the networking, not only with each other, but also with the program partners, is we all make money in different ways. And so the question is how can we leverage that to full effect? One of the questions that I got was, when we're working with donors or we're working with corporate partners, sometimes it takes time to go from first conversation to revenue. Whether that is a donor funding you or it is a corporate partner agreeing on a program. How do you guys deal with that situation, and what shorter term sources of funding do you use and why?
I was just thinking, because I was I don't know how we deal with it. But I think generally, especially in countries like ours, Pakistan, look, my Pakistani sisters in the room, and brother, sorry, back there. The sales cycle for working with corporates is ridiculous, so long. And then oftentimes, even when you get to the end of the cycle, it's still not a lot of money that you're even getting. So I think from our side, the consulting work that we've been doing more with private players, so not corporates per se, but more from the perspective of what started to happen. And just to give a little bit of background, with Eye to Eye, we literally started just as an accelerator program, and now every other vertical that we've developed at Eye to Eye was almost in response to what the ecosystem needed, but also as a need for us actually saying we can actually, there's a demand for this, we can start charging people for this, right? So realizing that one thing that happened, and the reason we generate revenue this way, and this is an easier sales cycle, was that a lot of people really needed research on the market. I know that Lake Castle Partners did this too before they started going more into acceleration. And so a lot of people don't understand the countries that we work in, right? And it's a country that they generally want to work in. And one thing that started to happen with Eye to Eye was that we realized that we had a really interesting role of having our feet in both places and being able to communicate what the market looked like, and realizing that we could actually do, even though the sales cycle is still relatively, it's more moderate, I think, when you're not working with corporates, but you're still dealing with clients on that side. But realizing we could do work on market entry, due diligence. There was a lot of players that wanted to enter the Pakistan market that were startups. We actually have been running pilots for companies looking to enter Pakistan, doing all of the facilitation. And so I think the thing there is that, that may not be applicable for you guys, but one thing that would be a good takeaway lesson was actually listening to the market and actually saying wait, there's a demand for this, and this is something that people are willing to pay for, and the sales cycle is actually shorter. So that's how we started to address that.
Awesome. Thanks. Any thoughts?
So we see sales cycles of about 12 to 18 months for large corporate partners, and that's at around a $500,000 to $1 million sale. So it takes a long time to cultivate that type of relationship, and it makes it quite lumpy when it comes to revenue coming in. So what we have found in terms of accelerating sales cycles is there's tons of business for us in consulting as well. I think we could build a whole entire business just doing consulting if we're not careful. So for us, the question is, how do we do strategic consulting around specific partners that will ultimately lever up into substantial $500,000 sales or $1 million sales for us? And so it's kind of this idea of a Trojan horse getting behind the walls of a castle. Once you're there, you're actually you're inside. You can much more quickly build trust with the corporation, the people that you're working with. And so some of our biggest sales ultimately started actually at smaller consulting levels, and then have kind of laddered up into much more substantial types of partnerships. But trying to smooth out the business cycle when it comes to a $500,000 sale, you have to deliver on that at some point, and deliver on it with excellence. And so the challenge is how do you align the wheels of a bicycle where you have the business development wheel of the bicycle spinning at the same speed as the organization's ability to deliver and implement that. That's a difficult interplay when you're talking about such lumpy sales cycles for us. And we're wrestling with that from a staffing perspective. But our experience has been, it can be very distracting to just focus on consulting. If you can be very specific and discriminating about, we will only work with specific candidates for consulting that you think are strategic in additional funding in the future, it can be a helpful way to get behind the walls of the castle, establish trust with key decision makers within these corporations, and then explore new opportunities from there.
I think I totally agree with that. Sorry, Luni. But just to say that I think that what a really important consideration to think about for you guys is the big picture vision of what you're doing, and ask yourself when you work backwards from there, is this project in service to that, right? So for us at Eye to Eye, we want to see success stories emerge from these markets. If you work backwards from that, the lack of information in Pakistan was something that is very debilitating for why investors don't enter the market, why it's so difficult to navigate. So when you work backwards from that, you're like, okay, that's why research makes sense. But then you always ask yourself that question on a regular basis, because otherwise you can totally get into the consulting mindset, which is really tricky, and you can experience mission drift really easily that way. So I think making sure that you're constantly checking in with yourself and your organization and asking that question is important.
Yeah, I'm going to take a slightly different twist. So in terms of my accelerator, we have sole focus on raising money from investors. That came about because when 7 years ago when I started fundraising for this, I could either get $25,000 checks from investors or $5,000 sponsorships from corporations. They take the same amount of time to go and talk to and close, so why would I do any of the sponsorship money? And nonetheless, we got a little bit at the beginning. Same thing with donors. We could get $10,000 checks for donors or $25,000 checks from investors. So I'd skip the donor part. I'd say, despite the focus just means that's 90% of the time. 10% of the time, I will fill out a grant proposal. I have yet to ever get a grant response. I don't know. I don't know whether I don't know how to speak grant, because I speak investor really well. I think that's a main part of it. The other part of it is we're just not a grant shop. We're an investor shop and speak investor. But at the same time, the other piece is that's how Fledge works. Fledge is an accelerator. That's not the only job I work at. I also teach entrepreneurship at an MBA school. They pay me to do that. I get paid. They're paying me to sit here on the panel and tell you the answers. So things pop up in my life. I just don't do them as my accelerator. I do them as me personally. Write some books, book income comes in. So one of the best piece of advice I got from my personal mentor was when I was coming out of my last company, he said, don't look for the next thing. Look for the next things. And so my main job, I always say, my full-time job is at Fledge. That's like 50 hours a week. And then I teach and I write books and I do other things with entrepreneurs for the rest of the time, which is the other 10 or 20 hours a week.
So Hien, over to you for your question.
Thank you. A question to Banks and Luni. As I'm interested in the very first step. So as Banks, you said that you get the companies hire you to run their acceleration. But when you first started, how can you persuade companies that can do that if they pay you as a very first newcomer? And the same for Luni. Pretty much a bit different. That you said that you get you raise fund from investors, and then if the companies pay you back, you get a percentage from that. But if in the first few years the company will not be paying you back, were you living on your own money on that? And as your advice to new accelerator like us, how much should we wait to see whether we should continue with the business or should we stop and do something else?
Okay. All right, so the very first year I went out to raise money, I found 3 investors that were willing to take a bet on an idea of a social good accelerator. The only proof we could give to them that it could possibly work was the first session of Unreasonable at the time, which had only been nonprofits, and you'll explain what that was. So that wasn't a whole lot of proof for these investors, and I think 2 Village Capital programs, one of which was a Hub Ventures. And that's all I could find. I didn't know about GSEC and some of the other older ones. But 3 investors were willing to take a chance. 2 of them knew me personally. The other one knew one of the other investors. They wrote a total of $75,000. I got paid nothing from the accelerator that year. That was enough money to run it. But that was then proof that it could work. And I went to a bunch of angels after that. And by the end of the year, had closed about $250,000 more on top of the 75. And so the very first investors are always the hardest to find. It's usually someone who knows you and trusts you. In the U.S., that's feasible. In the rest of the world, like, it's harder. What I see with my partners is that often the first dollars coming in are grants. So while I'm not a grant shop, they might be grant shops. They can find a grant to get them started with the first cohort. and then we go together to try and find investors after that.
I think for us getting started with corporations, we've never been able to convince a corporation from start to finish, like, hey, you should run an accelerator program. They say, yes, okay, we're persuaded. Oftentimes what will happen is they come to us and say, okay, we want to run something, and then we partner with them. And so very much it's on their own volition as opposed to us convincing them to run an initiative. And what happens is there's oftentimes a market signal of they're seeing other corporations running these types of programs and are recognizing, oh, that's valuable. Then they come and find us. So at an early stage, if you're just starting up, I think it's having a lot of conversations with corporations in your context, understanding what their priorities are when it comes to impact, what their priorities are when it comes to entrepreneurship, and just simply building a lot of loose ties and acquaintances so that when they are ready to come back to you, they know who you are. And that's been our experience, is that like we can't get somebody to say yes immediately, but oftentimes plant a seed, grow the seed over time, and then at the right time, they're going to give you a call.
Yeah. So maybe just one thing that I'll add to that is Impact Hub San Salvador, which is in El Salvador, they had the notion of doing corporate innovation, running incubators and accelerators for their community. And so what they did is they actually identified the top 30 corporations that they thought they could work with. And they actually reached out to a job title that they thought fit innovation, right? Could have been the CEO, could have been like a VP of marketing or whoever. And then they actually said, like, can we come in and do a 30-minute informational interview? And so they said, this is what we do. We teach people about innovation. This is how we do it. How do you guys view innovation? Tell us about your problem set around that. Like, they literally did customer discovery with those corporations. And from that, your comment about loose ties, initial conversations led them to actually securing a couple of innovation workshop opportunities. So smaller deals, build the relationship further, build the trust further, and then from there they were able to get one to say, hey, can you run a program for us, right? And so it was that process of building a relationship over time. And you heard it in Luni's comment too. Like Luni said, my first two investors were people who knew me personally, relationship already established. So our goal through this process is to build relationships. Other questions maybe from the crowd before we dive in? I want to give these guys room to ask more questions.
I got that. I didn't answer. There's one important piece in a question I didn't answer, which is where's the money come from until we get paid back? And the answer is pretty simple. Almost half the money that the investors give us is used to run the program, and then that piece of the capital is put into the investment. So the entrepreneurs don't see that we gave them $20,000. They see in the contract we gave them $37,500 of value, $20,000 of which was cash, $17,000 was program. So I get paid out of that. The rest of the expenses come out of that.
We have the first part of just the accelerator program, which we're going to roll out. The question is, you talked about a fee for your program. I just wanted to get a feel of what's the cost like, particularly that participants pay, and how is that set, and what's the value proposition that you give to the customers before setting your price, and how do you find the customers to take up the offer?
Yeah, so when I was talking about fee for service, I was talking about when we license our curriculum and people pay us to build out programs for them. So we've done that locally in Pakistan with the provincial government. The national incubation centers in Pakistan have hired us to design their content, run it. For our own program, this is where the corporate, the sponsorships and all of that, and the way that we've priced it is we literally said, okay, this covers what we actually did this year for our program, which isn't ideal and I wouldn't recommend this, but this is what we had to do this year, was that we actually priced each startup. So we said to put one company through the program, it costs, I think it cost us about $10,000, actually $8,000 now with the devaluation. Thanks to valuations. So about $8,000 to put a startup through our program for 4 months, right? So that way we were able to break it down for people. And you're like, if you give us, $20,000 that covers 2 companies, but it actually within that price, it covers our staff time, it covers transport, it covers and so we actually priced it accordingly. When we've worked with corporates before that have sponsored our entire program, we also actually create a licensing fee within that. So that actually creates a little bit more wiggle room for us. But what we did this year as a result is corporates, we had one big corporation that came in that decided to sponsor 2 companies, someone that sponsored 1. We say that you actually have the ability to be part of the selection process, even if they don't have the final say. And I actually say that as do not give them the final say because that will ruin your intake. And we've made that mistake before. But that actually worked because it's bite-sized ways for people to get involved versus a corporation sometimes not wanting to take on your entire program.
Banks, you used to charge and you flipped that with the old model. Why?
Yeah. Well, one quick question. How many of you are thinking to have the entrepreneurs pay to participate in your programs? And how many are looking to have another payer, whether it's a corporation, a foundation, investors, cover the cost?
You can do both.
You can do both. Yeah. I think it's a strategic question to consider. We've wrestled with that over the years of understanding, okay, to Luni's point, chasing entrepreneurs. I mean, all of us are working with a customer type that has a low ability to pay. Mm-hmm. Entrepreneurs have a low ability to pay. So you need to evaluate your own organization's capacity to chase down how much they can afford, and then is that going to cover your costs? And I think for Uncharted, we've seen 2 things. One is that in this impact accelerator space, there's this issue of programs being free. And what that does is it creates a problem in the marketplace where entrepreneurs are expecting free programs, and that cuts out the floor for us to be able to charge for our work because they're getting free programs elsewhere. And so this is sort of a moral hazard of the nonprofit impact accelerator space. That's one factor to consider that may or may not be at play in your context. The other question is, can you find a payer? And to Luni's point, for us to go out and cultivate a $500,000 sale from a large corporation certainly takes some time, but also it takes a ton of time to chase in entrepreneurs and have them pay you $1,500 or $2,000 or $5,000. And so I think that's something to consider. At the same time, what we have found is that entrepreneurs who get selected into programs who are not paying themselves regard it as an award that they have received and perhaps not as an investment that they are currently making in their business. So there's a trade-off that we make, and right now our programs we don't charge for our entrepreneurs. They don't pay, what I mean to say. In the past, they used to pay by crowdfunding on a crowdfunding platform to raise the fee, which was around $18,000 back at the time, to participate in our program. Ultimately, that still wasn't quite enough for us to cover our organizational costs, but they did crowdfunding to raise the funds. We then did a revenue share model where we were taking a percentage of top-line revenue or a percentage of profit, and we wrestled with that for a couple of years. We've since moved away from that partially for the sake of simplicity, and now we have a payer, which is a corporation or a foundation, that is basically underwriting the cost of a program. So if you are thinking about having the entrepreneur pay, okay, just consider what is the time investment of chasing down that funding, and how involved, and also will that prohibit certain entrepreneurs that you want to select from actually participating in the program?
I actually think what's really important is that if you're asking someone to pay, so actually personally, when I started Eye to Eye, we weren't an accelerator program. It was almost like a consulting model. I didn't even know what an accelerator was when I started this company. I just wanted to work with startups. And this was before there was nothing happening in the market back then. And I think the reason the accelerator came about was because I could not charge startups for consulting. People can't pay, right? And when we started the accelerator, what we do offer, so one thing that's really important is if you are going to charge them up front, you better provide them value for that money. And I think the biggest challenge is that sometimes when there are free models out there, they're going to much rather go to that because the value for no money is better than making sure that you're ensuring that. So I think what we we do is that we offer either we take sweat equity, so we either take 3%, we offer them an option. And this is after, again, listening to feedback that we were getting from startups. Equity in our market, sometimes it's really difficult to convince people to give up equity in their companies. But if we offer either 3%, or we say we'll take a flat fee if and when you raise funding, right? Again, that's a really bad business model because they may never raise funding, but it's almost like a token saying that this is how much it costs, and saying like we'll take a flat fee, $6,000. People feel way more comfortable with that in a lot of the countries that we operate in. So that's actually, out of our even startups in this cohort, 90% of them have opted for the flat fee.
What I need to share before my question is, in Indonesia, the investment pipeline is not there yet. Means like there is some VCs invest in early stage, means like a pre-seed, angel round, and then seed level. And then only few invest in A levels, and then there is only very few invest in B level, right? And that's put me as an accelerator and venture builder in a delicate positions. So we help founders build their startups by providing services in exchange of equity, right? And because we understand that the capital pathway is not complete yet, usually we decide to cash out some of our equity on the pre-series A. So we get a pretty good multiplier there. But those startups may need another round, right? And for example, in one of our cases, there's this one startup that are raising for the Series A, and when the investors talk to us and asking, why do you cash out your half of your equity? And we said that because we want to realize the profit, and because the pathway is not there, it will create a confusement because the investors for the Series A and the next stage prefer that the previous shareholder will continue to participate. But I cannot honestly speak to them because we cash out because there is, few possibility that this startup going to fundraise to Series C and hopefully for exit. So do you have any advice for that?
Okay, so about a third of the graduates of Fledge are from Africa, and if you think it's bad in Indonesia, you go move to Africa. Pretty much 99% of the investment into Africa is coming from the US and Europe into startups. China's doing the big projects. The answer is that you are investing in the wrong startups. Two things. You're investing in the wrong startups because you should not invest in a company that's going to need 3 rounds of funding when there isn't funders to do that. And 2, you're following a model that I found somewhere else on the internet. They called it California Capitalism. I love that term because I'm not from California. The model that you're investing in and the model those funds are investing in, again, don't fit what's available in the market. The model is assuming that there are plenty of funders to fund any good company, and that's not true outside of California, New York, and Boston. Full stop. The whole world. There's not enough money in Boston. There's not enough money in Seattle. There's not enough money in LA. There's not enough money in London for these kind of companies. So the kind of companies that I look for when I'm investing are highly capital efficient companies where they're already running cash flow positive or close to it right now, where every dollar we put in will earn at least $1 of revenue. And then when they get some money from us and the next investors, they of course want more money, but they don't need more money. They can get bigger by just growing it through profits. So if you find those kind of companies, and I'll bet you there's plenty of them, in Indonesia and in Bangladesh and in Pakistan and in Nepal and everywhere else in this room. Those are the kind of companies that the venture scale California capitalism investors would call unfundable, but they're not. They're just one level down on the pyramid of companies. They're in the middle group. They're totally fundable. I'll explain how on Thursday.
Yeah, and maybe one last comment on that is each one of the conversations here, and we're about to break up into our small groups, each one of the conversations is about our customer, the person who's going to give us money, right? So whether this is a donor or a funder or a corporate partner or the entrepreneurs, one of the things that we need to remember always is these people have expectations and hopes and fears. So to your point as well, just a final comment is investors in companies that are supposed to go venture scale do not like secondary exits until at least B round. So you're actually just breaking a cardinal rule by trying to get out an A round. So we do this in different ways all the time, us as organizations. So the important part is this is why we learn and this is why we share. As a personal observation on that, it's actually one of the reasons why Spring is global, is because one of the challenges that we find in North America is that people are comfortable. And so getting people to commit deeply to making a positive impact on the world is hard. When we work with organizations like yourselves and communities like yours, people are, they're embarking on this journey, right? The ecosystems are just being formed, or they're in the process of growing, like in Vietnam. And so there's a huge opportunity for all of us to speak into that now, such that 10 years from now, there is no word impact. Like your whole ecosystem is impact by default. That's what we're gunning for, right? So first, I just want to thank Banks and Cals and Luni for leading these tables. Thank you. Thanks everybody for your time. Much appreciated.